In this section, we're going to look at some of the drivers of fatigue. Now, it's very common to look at exercise failure resulting from local muscle fatigue, glycogen depletion, lactic acid accumulation, and a variety of other drivers of fatigue. As we're focused in this course, we're really emphasizing the impact that elevated temperature has on driving fatigue. Now, an important note is that fatigue is complex. It's impossible to fully model. It's a systems of systems, so it is a combination of a lot of different variables. However, on the basis of the zeroth law of physiology and using physics as a backbone, if temperature cannot remain in optimal or required thermal boundary conditions, the other variables are unable to compensate for that. So that sort of is a non-negotiable, that if the physics don't allow for work to be done, work cannot be done regardless of all the other metrics. So it really is a non-negotiable that temperature has to be in an acceptable range. Now, in research done by Marino and team in a fantastic book, they found that subjects cycling in the heat showed a 28% reduction in voluntary muscle activation compared to a thermal neutral control. And this is despite similar workloads. So this isn't a depletion of muscle glycogen or changes in blood oxygenation or even marked acidosis. And this is the chart that they posted there. So what you see is in the black is the control, so that's thermal neutral, and then the white is hyperthermia. So you see the voluntary activation percentage significantly hampered in a state of hyperthermia, and all the other drivers of fatigue were negligible or not significant in this effect. So this just shows that hyperthermia alone has the ability to downregulate voluntary activation. Now, in another study, they looked at muscle glycogen levels in the heat and comparing the impact of hyperthermia on fatigue versus glycogen. So we've got this chart here. So you'll see in black is in hot conditions, and that's at 40 degrees Celsius. Gray is neutral conditions, that's 20 degrees Celsius. And then white is cold conditions, so 3 degrees Celsius. So quite different temperature ranges. And you see exercise time to exhaustion was significantly different. And when it was hotter, participants reached exhaustion much, much faster. The coldest conditions, they reached exhaustion much, much later. So that on the left would indicate that temperature has a big effect on endurance, the ability to continue to perform. Now we look at the right, and this is where it gets interesting, is we're looking at muscle glycogen levels. Now at rest, all three cases were pretty consistent, so pretty close. Now what's interesting is when you get to the point of fatigue or the point of exhaustion when these trials ended, in the hot group, there were still significantly higher levels of muscle glycogen as opposed to the other conditions, indicating that they reached failure despite having plenty or sufficient muscle glycogen remaining. So it wasn't a matter of fuel depletion. This leads you to believe that it was driven by hyperthermia. You'll see that the muscle glycogen was the lowest, the furthest or closest to being fully depleted in the coldest temperatures, in which case you could assume that failure was reached potentially still by hyperthermia, the body reaching elevated temperatures due to the duration and intensity of exercise. But the limiting factor would have been temperature, not glycogen, as we compare in these trials.